Apple debuted the new iPad 2.
Ladies and gentlemen, Conan O'Brien is special guest today.
On the Apple website. And I don't know about you, I saw the video. I personally think that the people at Apple are starting to get a little bit cocky. I do. Take a look.
iPad 2 is the culmination of literally 2 to 3 meetings. It's truly incredible how little we did. We knew that if we changed the color, put pictures of water droplets on the desktop, made it a little faster, added 2 holes with cheap cameras in them, then just kind of flattened it a bit, people would just go nuts.
One of my favorite things about the iPad 2 launch is that I get to keep this tight black shirt, which I think really pops against white backgrounds.
Is iPad 2 incredible? Yes. Are you believing what I am saying partially because I have a non-specific ethnic accent? Absolutely.
A lot of customers will say, what about me? I just bought the old iPad. And to you I say, off.
Well, I saw that on YouTube the other day, and I thought we got to play that on the podcast. I thought it was pretty brilliant.
I thought it was pretty excellent, especially since watching the video that Apple put out. It was pretty over the top how self promoting it was.
Yeah, they're very self-congratulatory in their promotion, and obviously it's working for them. And I should say, welcome everybody. This is FauxTech FauxTech. Blah, blah, blah. How can we do tongue twisters for our names?
Toy boat. Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. This is FauxTech Podcast Episode 2. I'm sitting here with Anthony Wilkinson.
Greetings, everybody.
And Rand is traveling right now. He's probably on an airplane somewhere over the mid U.S. right now, heading on a little break with his family. Much deserved.
Mm-hmm. Safe travels.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, that we played that because one, it was pretty funny. 2, the iPad 2 came out in the U.S. On Friday. Apparently lots of long lineups and sellouts all over the U.S. So, you lucky guys over there, hopefully you got one. Anthony and I decided we don't want to discuss and talk about that too much. There's lots of information out there on the internet about the iPad 2.
Yeah, we were just talking about how kind of, as far as a news week is concerned, it's been fairly slow, except, of course, for the iPad launch.
Yeah. Good timing, I guess, on Apple's part. Maybe they have a lot more control than we think.
Yeah. Finding that gap where there's nobody doing anything or releasing anything.
And I guess South by Southwest is on right now as well, which would be a great place to be. Be a lot of fun to go down to that sometime. So hopefully you're all having fun, those that are there as well. So Anthony Wilkinson, I thought we would take some time in this podcast to talk about you a little bit. Rand and I have talked on the FauxCast a little bit about our tech history and why we've been into the technology throughout our years. But I thought it'd be great just to get to know you a little bit for the people listening at home, and talk about your journey a little bit. And what gives you the credentials to be on a tech podcast?
I don't know. Just knowing the right people, I guess. I think it's part of that. It's funny how, as tech people, certainly the stereotype, and it's been true for me, is you kind of work in isolation.
Yeah.
And there's a point where you realize you can't do everything on your own. You can't do everything in isolation. And when you start talking to other people of similar interests, you realize there's so much more that can be done. Like, everybody kind of has their own specialty, even within the field of tech.
Absolutely.
And when you join forces with those people, and when you collaborate on projects. So I think, this is a project, not a project, but this is something we've kind of touched on a bit in our own conversations, is like getting together with other people in technology, even, the business side of it notwithstanding, you have a lot more expertise in certain fields. And
absolutely.
So much more can get done. And I think,
and the truth is, like, technology is so vast and there's so many elements that, I used to think I could try to master everything.
Exactly.
But I've definitely, especially with web design, things like that, I've just focused in on the areas that I'm really good at. And then I hire people that are really, really good and passionate about other areas. And that's the best way to make it work.
Well, that's the funny part, because I mean, I was watching Frank Zappa. I find very interesting. I find his music very interesting. And it's the same thing as like his philosophy as a band leader. And I mean, he had developed a reputation for being very demanding. But at the same time, he said his greatest skill was finding what was special inside of each of those musicians and giving them a place to showcase that talent in a band format. And I think
that's awesome.
As tech people, we kind of abandon that. We all think we're solo artists, and I think it's to our detriment.
I absolutely agree with you 100%. And the same, like you said, could apply to so many things. In the creative industry, because I don't know if tech is often thought of as a creative industry, but as a creative person who's involved in music and other things in my life, I feel the same kind of creativity with technology and tech-related projects. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's funny because certainly my background is kind of as a hacker and a coder. So when I was really young, I was debugging software, and I was in high school. That was what really grabbed my interest. Was we were doing C++ and Turing and all this other programming languages. And when you sit down and think about it, it's kind of like learning another language, but another way, it's a very creative process sometimes.
Absolutely.
And that's where a lot of people don't think. They see programming as like a mathematical operation, and it's not. You're applying algorithms using code, but a lot of it's creativity.
Absolutely.
And so I think in a lot of ways, like I certainly have no skills in the visual arts, or very little skill, I should say. I have a lot of opinions about layout, but as far as like fine art skills and graphics and drawing, it's like that's not my forte.
Right. And I would, on the opposite side of it, that's probably more my forte than even the coding, even though I can do pretty good with that. But there's certain levels of coding that I would, hand over to Anthony as opposed to trying to attempt it myself. Because I'm more of a visual person. I can always see how the site's going to look, and I enjoy the challenge of taking that out of, first of all, usually out of a client's mind, to a simple sketch, and then creating all of the graphical elements, and then going, okay, now I've got to make this into a web page. And I really enjoy that challenge. So let's talk a bit about what you're doing right now, and then we'll backtrack and how you got to this point, Anthony.
So what I'm doing right now in terms of work, like I have kind of always a mix of projects. And so right now I have a couple of projects where I'm doing like community support, sort of a thing where I'm working with a company where I'm basically managing their blog, managing their Twitter feed, helping train their staff on how to use those tools, on how to market their business. And then I have some other projects that are coming up and on the go. And one is like basically building a database application that interfaces with industrial hardware and gives the engineers at that company reports so they can see, what their uptime is, how much, basically what the machine's doing at certain points of the day, so then they can kind of evaluate, are they getting the most use out of it, sort of those sort of metrics. And I do personal projects. I've been working on like a project involving a Commodore 64, which involves basically connecting a hard drive controller to it, and then there's also you can connect it to Ethernet and possibly get it online and actually access websites and access. Apparently, there's a Twitter client for it as well. So
that's pretty awesome.
I like to take on those kind of little strange projects.
Yeah, no kidding. That's right up my alley. Takes me back. Definitely takes me back to, I haven't had time to actually play around with things like that, but when I was younger, taking apart electronics and computers and rebuilding things and creating robots and all that kind of stuff, right? With servos and trying to make them do silly little things. It's inspiring.
Yeah, I think that's one of those. Again, we kind of talked last week a little bit about like how like games are becoming, or education can be served by incorporating that with games. And
absolutely.
So I think it's interesting that we kind of lose. Again, not being a young person and not knowing a lot of young people. I mean, like in the pre-teens, I know as myself, I was doing the same thing, like taking toys apart, figuring how they worked, putting them back together, and that combined with kind of the software side of things, you can do a lot of interesting things. And I don't know where kids nowadays are getting those sorts of skills or where they're engaging that way.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Like I often look at kids today, and this thought actually has really been on my mind for the last few months, actually since a guy said to me, my brother doesn't even know how to put a stick of RAM in his computer, and it made me think, because I haven't really thought about this, and I thought, here you are, this generation of kids growing up that have computers all around them, and they use them every day. They know how to use a computer inside and out, but they don't know how to fix
It's like
a
a
computer.
toaster to them.
Exactly.
It's like a toaster or a microwave. Like you put things in, things come out, but they don't feel like there's a real need to understand how things work internally. They just basically know what they want out of it at the end of the day.
And I guess that's, a good thing in a way, because computers have become very, very stable over the years. Like really, when's the last time, Windows 7 has crashed on you? Yesterday.
Yeah, actually, no. That's the thing. Like on my machine, like Windows 7, I don't think I've ever had it crash once. And I do make it do ridiculous things.
Yeah.
Like I run the processor out of spec. I do all sorts of things with it. And it's been pretty well behaved. And certainly I think that's been the kind of consensus is like, even on the PC side, is like things have been getting more and more stable. And
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The biggest complaint with a computer is that it's slow, not necessarily that it's doing anything strange or untoward to you. So
yeah, and obviously, Mac OS 10 is very rock solid. And I was thinking about that the other day. Like, when was the last time I really had a major crash on my computer? And it's like, it used to be blue screen of death all the time, and you'd be always tweaking, your registries and all this kind of stuff to optimize your computer, so that wouldn't happen in the middle of a creative moment. And maybe we're getting a little bit soft.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I think part of like what I think is wrong with talking about the PC side, but I think from the Mac side of it, it's like it's becoming such a commodity driven industry. Like you buy, like it's just a box you buy. And I think there's a certain amount, again, as somebody who builds custom PCs,
Yeah.
I have bias in that regard, but I do think there's a lot of that creativity is gone, where people just basically want something to go on the internet, and then 3 years they're going to throw it out, and that's going to be the end of it.
Yeah, it's definitely become an appliance, and I think Steve Jobs actually must be like living his dream right now with the iPad and the iPhone and these things, because I think him and Wozniak back in the day, like when the Apple II came out, made the statement that they wanted a computer to become like an appliance.
Yeah,
and it's taken
this
how many years, 25 years now, for that to become a reality. And I guess, the concern for me, and maybe for you too, with this kind of focus on things getting smaller and smaller, and yes, very, very focused on the applications, very good at the applications they do, are the computer manufacturers, are they going to forget about us that need desktops and room for PCI slots and cards, and are they going to forget about us? Like, I actually worry about that with Mac more so than PC.
We're going to become, I think, more of a niche. I mean, it's the same thing with like gaming PCs. It's become like a niche of a much larger segment, and that's kind of one of my criticisms I level toward Apple is like they're hard to repair. I mean, if you're looking at an Apple, an iMac right now, it's basically using laptop scale components stuck behind a monitor with a really nice casing over top.
Yeah.
You got to take that apart.
Yeah,
it's a bit of a pain sometimes.
For sure.
But I mean, I kind of feel like, again, this is kind of like my dad talking, where you went in and you worked on like a 1960s, 1970s vehicle.
Right.
You could replace the parts.
Absolutely.
You was self-servicing. It was a lot. Everything was mechanical, so it was easy to intuitively understand how things were working, and to replace those parts was fairly non. You didn't need a computer to do that. You didn't need sophisticated electronics. You just needed hand tools.
Yeah, exactly.
And nowadays with vehicles, a lot of it's like they're throwing codes to the dash. And you have to use a decode. You have to plug in that coding machine, figure out what the code means. And so I think it's going kind of that way in the PC side where.
Yeah. I don't disagree. In fact, maybe we'll see a day, I guess we maybe already do, with people modding their computers and so on and so forth, but maybe we'll see a day where instead of a classic car show, it's like a classic computer show, and you walk down and you take a walk around and look how people have modded their computers.
Yeah, and there's a really strong online group of people who do that
Absolutely.
sort of thing. So that's kind of an interesting. I think it's as the price goes down to zero, it becomes less of a, as computer electronics become cheaper, that becomes less and less likely. But it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see how the market goes.
Yeah. Well, it definitely seems to be going more and more mobile, and of course that's great too, because as developers, that gives us more and more people that are consuming content and the things we create. So it works great all the way around. So I don't know if you want to say how old you are, Anthony.
I kind of forget. I'm old now because I kind of forget. I don't know. I'm 33.
Oh man, you're just a young.
I'm 33 years old.
Oh my gosh, I thought you were older than that.
Wow.
No, I'm kidding. He doesn't look a day over 20.
Yeah, it's my party hard lifestyle. Clearly,
that's right. So in those 33 years, what got you into tech? Were you always into technology, even as a young kid?
Yeah, I think like it came out of the educational side of things for me. When we were, it was before the home PC revolution by far.
Right.
So we didn't have a Nintendo, we didn't have an Atari, we didn't have a ColecoVision, any of that stuff. I had some kind of friends growing up who did have those sorts of things, and they were interesting, but I had a lot of stuff going on in my childhood, and I played outside a lot. I was a pretty active kid. My dad was into cars and snowmobiles and dirt bikes and stuff like that. So I kind of saw him working on things as well. So I was kind of more mechanically inclined as a young person.
Right.
And I think what was interesting is my exposure was really mostly through other people. So I had the kid that lived across the road. This is in Kinburn, which is 8 houses. But one of those kids in one of those houses had a ColecoVision. I remember playing the Smurfs game on it or something.
I remember that game.
Or there was one where you were jumping around on an ice floe building an igloo. I can't remember what that game was called. I looked it up on Google the other day, but it was Sub-Zero.
Yeah, that sounds like
Sub-Zero?
it.
Yeah.
That sounds like it.
And so that was really cool. But at the time, as a kid, we didn't really have the means to buy those things. Now, my dad, I remember, brought home an Odyssey 2.
Wow.
Which was kind of similar to those machines.
Right.
And this is going to be completely interesting to zero people, but that was one of the first Intel processors.
Right.
Was in that machine.
Interesting.
So that was early on. And I think the icon system, I don't know if we talked about that
we
the
did.
other day.
We briefly mentioned that last week, and I remember the icons in school. I'm trying to remember if I had them actually in public school or if they were in high school. What year was that, the icon computers?
I remember I looked up, because there's not a lot of information online. I don't know if this is just an Ontario. Yeah, is that the Odyssey you're bringing up there?
Yeah, I'm going to pull it up here in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
2 shakes.
Sorry, I shouldn't be spying on you.
No, that's okay.
But the icons, I think, were early 80s. And I don't know if it was just confined to the Ontario Public School Board, because there seems to be very little information other than you go on forums and people be like, hey, remember those icons when we were spinning the giant trackball? And that was it. People are trying to find hardware, because it was a terminal server system where you had a bunch of terminals, which basically had no processing capability. They connected to a server and downloaded the software. So that's the Odyssey.
Interesting.
That's the Odyssey there.
Yeah, that's the Odyssey too. So you had one of those at home.
Yeah, the keyboard wasn't like where you're looking at your regular keyboard, where it's individual keys. It was this flat plastic panel.
Yeah, kind of like the Texas Instrument computer. What was that?
The TI. Oh yeah, the
little
trash,
wee black.
There's the Trash 80.
Yeah,
the TRS 80. And it was just kind of had these very rudimentary games, but they were pretty fun.
That's awesome.
So that was that, but I don't remember playing it a heck of a lot. But I remember my dad bringing it home and being pretty excited about it.
Oh yeah. My dad was probably similar to your dad, where he would find little treasures like that in pawn shops and used in places like that and bring them home. So my dad, he did radio for years. So it's kind of funny, actually, because I kind of feel like we've got a little radio studio going here. I remember he had a little studio similar to what we have right here in his back little office with big reel-to-reel recorders and a microphone, and he would do a radio show that was syndicated out through the U.S. and Canada. I think overseas on a few stations as well. And so that was always very interesting to me, because Dad always had a lot of electronics around that I would pull apart and rebuild, and I'd set up my own kind of stereos and setups in my room, like mixing, matching, because nothing was ever a set or anything.
Yeah,
I was always
exactly. You'd have different speakers and
mix and matching things and try to make things sound good. And probably that probably conditioned me as well as you know, to always be tweaking things.
Mm-hmm.
And when computers came along, I mean, what a great tool to tweak on.
yeah, like certainly like, and again, I think this is more in the early days. I remember my first computer, and this was when I was 17, but this was just after Windows 95 came out.
Right.
And so it was a lot of like playing with system files. I remember it's funny because I fixed a lot of Windows 95 systems, but I remember there was a couple system files that you could basically back up if the machine was toasted, and you could kind of restore them from earlier versions and then try to reload the operating system that way. And yeah, I remember a lot of time playing with that. From the very same thing. It's like trying to get just that little bit of more performance out.
Yeah.
Because it was kind of at that period initially where the software you ran, like in gaming in particular, was outpacing the hardware still.
Absolutely. And it's still happening.
Mm-hmm.
You know, do you think you're probably more of a programmer and you're definitely a game guy, developer of games. Do you find that, do you think that a lot of programming of games these days is bloated because it can be, and it could be a lot tighter, the code and so on and so forth?
Well, there's always this cowboy mentality, I think, with programmers. That's certainly at the elite levels. And they have this term called coding to the metal.
Right.
Which is basically you're writing an assembly and you're writing directly to the hardware itself. And I think that's kind of gone away. I shouldn't say that's kind of gone away. I can say that's totally gone away, at least on the PC front. And so now you buy what's called middleware. So you're allowed to that allows you to really quickly scale up a game, in that you're bringing different elements together and you're just creating the art elements and things like that. And you're buying what's called an engine.
Right.
I don't think it's so sloppy in that. I think you're just getting it from different places. I think with all software on the PC, there's a certain amount of bloat.
Yeah.
Because that's basically the trade-off for being able to write software a lot faster.
Right. Yeah, and be able to pump it out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we, you know, people with typically 4 gigs of RAM now, like, which was unheard of back when we were using 64
like 4 meg of
kilobytes.
RAM.
Yeah, 4 meg was like a dream.
I remember my computer came with 4 meg, and I had to buy another.
Wow.
I remember I had to buy another 4 meg, and it was $300.
And there we are doing that old man's voice.
Old man voice. I had to bale hay for like a month.
Yeah.
Of course, the funny thing, too, is I bought that, and it made absolutely no difference. I bought it specifically to make Doom 2 run faster.
Nice.
Or Doom 1, maybe. And it was a complete...
You're realizing, wait a minute, it's graphics. I need a new graphics card.
Well, and this is pre-graphics card, too.
Yeah, I guess it would be, wouldn't it?
So I thought I was going to just have all these benefits, and then I realized there's 0 benefits whatsoever.
Crazy. I remember my first 20 megabyte hard drive. And I had, same as you, I had to save up for it. And I can't remember the price, but it was a lot of money.
Yeah, it was just a ridiculous price per megabyte back then.
Insane. We're living in a golden age that way. That's for sure.
Well, and that's kind of the point I was roundaboutly not getting to earlier, was like, if I was 12 again, again, all this stuff takes money, but I'm thinking like, if I had more money, I think I would buy a Lego Mindstorms in a second.
Yeah.
Like if I had kids,
for sure,
man. Just imagine the stuff, you can get PC parts so cheap, and you have people basically. I have people now who are basically throwing out computers that are still kind of semi-functional.
Oh yeah.
So that's.
I see the computers that get thrown away, and I just want to gather them all up and give them a home.
I do that, and it's a horrible habit. It's the worst. We're turning into, and I had this conversation with a couple of kind of techie people. We kind of. Like, you're good because you have your lovely wife and child. And that kind of, I think, probably keeps you from keeping too much junk around.
There's no doubt if I was single, and every room would be this room.
Yeah. Just full of gear.
Let's see what,
But I think it's because we grew up in those times where everything was so expensive that
absolutely
we still value technology a lot more than most people do.
Absolutely. And it's like using your analogy of kind of how things recycle. It's no different than, people that are elderly in our generation that are older than us, how they keep food, and
they keep boxes.
It's absolutely the same mentality. And I wonder what that'll be for this generation.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of one of those, again, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but we do we're a throwaway society in a lot of ways,
Absolutely.
and we're trying to. And I think a lot of us. I mean, it's difficult to change, but I think a lot of us are trying to change that. So how can we be less of a throwaway society, but still basically we demand a lot of performance and we demand these gadgets and how do we put those two pieces together is kind of going to be a challenge moving forward.
I agree, and computers. I often think like computers have gotten to such a point that actually a lot of the computers that I have in this room are actually 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old. And before that, it was always exciting to upgrade. Like, you had a 286 and you got a 386 and you got a 486 and then the Pentium came out and then a dual processor and all that. And it was always a very large step each time when I upgraded.
The jump from the Pentium the jump from the 486 series to the Pentium was a colossal performance
insane.
gain.
And you had to have that. Like you were like the speed difference was incredible. And I guess my point was that computers that are 5 years old are still useful to me. Where
absolutely.
Where if you go back 5 years even, and the computer I had 5 years before that wasn't of any use to me.
Yeah.
Right. Where computers now, they always still have a use, even if it's just word processing or it's part of a render farm or networked up to render things.
That's kind of like what I do in my office. It's like, and the same thing probably you do here is like my phone server is basically like a 5-year-old machine.
Right.
My file server is basically a 5-year-old machine or 6-year-old machine.
Yeah.
I have a machine that's specifically set up to image hard drive. It's like 8 years old.
Yeah.
And an interesting ecosystem that develops again in my world as I upgraded my machine. So I went from like a Core 2 Duo up to like a i5.
Nice.
So my old machine always goes to like one of my friends that basically buys like because I can sell it, for basically cheap, and they get it. They go up to a new machine because they're not.
Yeah.
They don't need that sort of performance where I'm looking to gain it.
Yeah, and I do the same thing. I have a couple of AMD. What was the I can't remember the processor, but anyway, still great computers. And but anyway, I sold one really cheap to my brother, and another one I keep out at the studio that we use for remote recording.
Yeah.
But if I hadn't found a home for them, they'd be here. And I'd be using them because they're still very, very useful.
Yeah.
They're great for recording music. They could do a lot of tasks still.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of those things that got me interested in that Commodore 64 project was like, and that alludes to your earlier point about, I don't know what that was kind of a strange point.
Well, no, that's why I asked you, because as a coder, and that's why I found it interesting. Like to me, especially as devices are starting to get smaller again, right? With less RAM. I mean, the iPad 2, I think only has 512 megabytes of RAM, right? Like that seems so minuscule and small in today's standards with our computers. So I think it's, and I'm not a game coder or even a programmer in the sense where I develop software. I know it's a different monster than developing websites and so on and so forth. But I'm thinking the challenge is back again. I guess if code was bloated before
in mobile,
and then going back to this Commodore 64, man, if you can make a game look and work awesome on that, it's going to work great.
Well, and that's what I find really amazing. And again, I could totally geek out here.
Go for it.
I was talking with somebody online about a fellow called Andrew Braybrook. Braybook, and he wrote games for my favorite game of all time on the Commodore 64, and maybe of all time ever, is called a game called Paradroid.
Yeah.
And what was amazing, what continues to be amazing to me, is people have written copies of Paradroid for their computer, for the PC, I mean, and it runs nowhere nearly as smoothly as it does on the Commodore 64.
Right.
And I read how he had to do that, and like all of these guys, not only do they have to write a game that functions, they also have to write their own compression algorithms because they can only get it into 64K of memory.
Right.
And so just those amazing, like, it's kind of that crucible where really great programmers come out of. I find it strange that a lot of them have dropped out of the industry. Like I don't even know where this guy has gone, but it seems like those guys that were kind of these legendary Commodore 64 programmers never seem to really make the leap, or they maybe moved into Amiga, and that's why I haven't heard of them. I'm not sure, but so yeah, those limitations have kind of come back to a certain extent with mobile, but yeah, it's a different animal nowadays, that's for sure.
Totally. I'm just going to pull up something, take you down memory lane if you don't mind.
No, absolutely.
Get your reaction to this. If we can pull it up here, does this look familiar?
That looks very familiar. It's funny because I was at a game conference. You think you're alone in some of these things, especially like for both of us growing up in this small community. And I bumped into a guy at I love that sound.
Those sounds are amazing. Like those are old analog
the SID chip, I think it's the SID 6502. The interesting thing is for that is they've developed synthesizers that use these sound chips specifically.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
So what I was saying is I was at a game conference. I was talking to another gentleman who's a producer he was formerly a producer for Sony. Mm-hmm. And this puzzle we're seeing here, they wanted to use this in like a game that came out like 2 years. I think it was, I can't remember if it was Just Cause or what it was, but it was like, because we were both talking how like amazing this puzzle was.
Right.
This little kind of like mini game inside of this larger game, and they wanted to use it for a modern game. But
that's awesome.
I think due to legal ramifications or whatever, they just decided they didn't want to take the risk. Anyways, that's
pretty cool, man.
Kudos to Mr. Braybrook and
absolutely
as well. So
you look at that stuff, and as far as the graphics being antiquated and stuff, but we sure had a lot of fun on those games.
Well, and just looking at I find that a lot of interesting parallels between like the Commodore 64 games where you only have like really one or two core game mechanics.
Right.
So in this game, for instance, it's like that little takeover game plus the moving around the ship. Mm-hmm. And so it's only one or two. And that's kind of the model that's being developed for, because of the limitations of the hardware, is being limitation for like, this is the way it's going for smartphones as well.
Right.
Or instead of, we're coming up with our new versions of Paperboy and our new versions of Pac-Man, basically.
Yeah. And there's still obviously a big nostalgic community, and some of these games will continue to live on probably for forever. Mm-hmm. Cool. I kind of lost my my train of thought there for a second, but
I think it just classically, like, I know we were talking about kind of our past experiences. So,
yeah.
I mean, so for you, what was your first kind of computer experience beyond the radio side of things?
Yeah, beyond the radio, I mean, it all started with that kind of thing, with those kind of electronics. And I've always been into music and creating sounds. My first computer experience where it really, really hit home was in high school when I took a computer programming course, programming in BASIC. And these would be old IBMs. Old IBMs, probably 8086s or something like that. I can't remember the models. But what I really found in that course was that I understood it. Like, it made sense to me, where French didn't, or other things that I was in school for.
Yeah.
Like, it's like you give me a problem and I write some code, and as basic as it was, maybe it was just creating an algorithm to calculate something.
Yeah.
But the fact that I could write the language and hit, run or type in run on the computer, and it would spout out the answer, that just blew my mind. I remember creating a program. One of my projects was to create a program that generated social SIN, social insurance numbers. And the fact that it was always right, and it worked, and there was an algorithm for that, blew my mind. And from there, my first computer at home was it was an Atom, ColecoVision Atom computer. And if you want to see a picture of that, you can check out the FauxCast. I think a couple FauxCasts ago, Randall and I talked about our first computers. Mm-hmm. And what I liked about that was it felt like a real computer, and it had BASIC, and it had a 5 1/4 floppy, separate floppy drive, and it had a printer, and you hitched it up to your television, and it played ColecoVision games.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, I know it wasn't very popular, but
it was kind of a step up from it wasn't a game console, but it was like taking that functionality, making it more of a PC sort of a thing.
It was totally a computer. Like it ran, there was MS-DOS for it and all the rest. And then after that, my dad brought home, excuse me, it would have been prior to 286. It was an IBM. I'm sure it was an IBM,
like an 8086 or an 8088.
It was, but it was a fold-up one. Like it was. I wish I could find a picture. I've searched and searched, and honestly, it was like a laptop, except it was a full keyboard, the width of a full normal keyboard that you see on any PC today. And that keyboard flipped down, and a little LCD screen popped up, and it wasn't. And it was like all green, like it wasn't color or anything.
It was like kind of like those, washy kind of monochrome display.
Yeah, monochrome display, and it had 2 3.5 inch drives in it. and in everything. So yeah, and that was my first computer, and so of course, programming. This was before Windows or anything like that. That was just an amazing thing to have because I could just carry it places.
Now, when you were a kid, did you do Logo?
I don't remember Logo. No,
Okay.
I was mostly doing basic programming.
So that must have come. I find that interesting because I know there was a time when playing with my headphone here. There was a time when Logo was kind of the precursor for that's my first programming language basically.
Yeah.
Where all you did was there was a triangle, you call it the turtle, and you would give it like a distance, and you could get it to turn and go on distance again. So you'd have it drawing squares or triangles and stuff. And so I think there was a really short time period where people were using that language, but I find that interesting. I hear a lot of people talk to me about punch cards, and I'm glad I missed out on
Yeah, I totally missed out on that. Like my first computers were 5 1/4 discs, and then from there it was Amiga, and Atari computers because they were
the Falcon.
Yeah, the Falcon,
Yeah.
and because they were what, and the reason those things were awesome is they had MIDI and stuff built in, and as a musician, that was very, very handy.
Yeah.
So my experience with sequencing and working with keyboards started with that. And that was really, really revolutionary for me, that I could write notes on a screen and it would play back through a synthesizer or a keyboard that wasn't, the computer sound card, which sounded like, well, pretty cool now that we just listened to that other thing, but but not quite what I was looking for. And so then I was also messing around tons and tons with synthesizers at the time, and still do to some degree. So creating sounds, which was sort of the same thing, as creating software and programming on a computer. And when graphical interfaces came out, that just totally, changed everything for me. I mean, that was, to me, that made a lot of sense. And the Atari already had that, long before Windows, I guess 3.1 came out.
That was the thing too. Like the Amigas were really sophisticated in that sense, as well as were the Ataris.
Yeah,
I look back on these things and I realize I've missed some opportunities maybe because of my stubbornness. But I remember I would write custom menus in DOS and write custom batch files in DOS to do like all these DOS operations.
Right. Yeah.
So when the graphical interface, because I think by the time I got to high school, everything was Windows 3.1, and I used to hate it.
Right.
Just because it felt so slow all the time.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
But it was very important to
absolutely
get more people using the PC, and now we think about I would never go back to command line ever. I know.
Oh no, I mean we still use it from time to time. Obviously, actually, probably Mac guys probably use it more than PC guys with terminal and things like that, and writing custom scripts and things to automate things and things like that. And that goes back to its Unix foundation, and it's pretty handy. But at the same time, I find, and maybe you not so much, but I find that that's like a language I learned a long time ago, and it's like I grew up. I don't know, pick a country, and I used to know Spanish, but I've been living in Canada for so long that to say those Spanish words is really, really difficult. So I find it actually really challenging going back into that language.
To forget this, and it's with programming too. You don't speak a language, and programming is very much a language. You don't speak it long enough, you have trouble. I know when I get in there and I have to write C++ code,
right?
And I don't do it. I don't do it very often.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple times a year, and then I occasionally make just goofball errors where I'm calling a function incorrectly.
Right.
Because I don't know, or so that's kind of an interesting parallel.
Yeah, absolutely.
There
it is. Sorry.
Oh, did you find it?
Yeah, you guys keep talking.
Keep talking about yourselves. No, I was just gonna say my first kind of, and I little video post about this, but my first kind of computing experience was I had two uncles. I had more than two uncles, but the two uncles on my mother's side, they both had computers. They were both roughly the same age, and one uncle had a Commodore 64, and the other uncle had a TI 99. And it's funny now because especially the Mac versus PC commercials brought this back for me.
Right,
is they would always bicker over the dinner table about how crappy the other person's computer was and how awesome their computer was. Because I remember the TRS, a Texas Instruments machine had like a full speech synthesizer. So I spent like all afternoon trying to make it say swear words.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Hey man, I'm just having an awfully exciting nostalgic moment here because I've searched for a picture of this because I described this on the podcast when Rand and I were talking about our tech history.
Yeah.
And like he was like, that didn't even,
Yeah, as soon as you say LCD,
it's like LCD screen, but
whatever.
Honest to God, folks, there it is, 1988 PPC 640. My dad brought one of these home, and it changed my life.
Look at how tiny the display is.
Yeah, and it was so portable. And that keyboard that you see there flipped over, so the screen popped down, and the keyboard flipped over, and you had your little handle, and you walked around with it. And it was like I'd take it to school and places, and of course that was like ultimately cool to have.
Oh, that's totally cool.
Laptop.
The pre-laptop laptop. What? No, did they say what year this was?
This was 1988.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, 1988. That's, and I was typing 1987, so that was my mistake. So it would have been 1988 that I had this computer. 640K of memory. It had an 8088. That's why I was thinking 8086. So it had an 8088 processor, 320 by 200 flip out monochrome screen. Can you imagine? That's awesome.
Don't use too many characters. You don't want to fill that puppy up. Right
No.
there.
So anyway, that's my little trip down memory lane.
It's amazing. I remember my dad had a. I didn't use it very much because it was, I thought, a piece of garbage. But my dad had a Tandy.
Yes, yeah. The Tandy Radio Shack computers.
Yeah. It was like a full PC sort of computer, except it ran like
Yep.
it ran like PC DOS or something, and it ran
Yep.
this graphical software called DeskMate. But there was no hard drive, so you're constantly swapping out disks.
Right. Yes.
And
And it was the same with that computer.
Yeah, the only relevance it had to me was that it played Space Quest 3.
Right. Oh,
So I played
someone else that plays Space Quest and King's Quest. Did you play King's Quest?
that was the only Quest game because I didn't have a computer yet at
The
that point.
Sierra games.
Yeah, the Sierra game. So
Yeah.
that was the kind of like when I would go to stay with my dad's before, because I went to Scouts that night. So my dad lived in Clinton, so I went off to buy. So I had a couple of hours to play it before Scouts.
Nice.
Once a week. And it was like a monochrome screen. It was the amber, not the green black, but the orange black, and
Yeah.
just that was kind of my first experience with that.
Those games I was really into those games. The King's Quest series, the Space Quest series. And of course they get better and better. Is Sierra even around? Or they must have been bought up.
They
by
got bought like many times.
Leisure Suit Larry.
Yeah. That was I think that's the most recent of those games that came out, and it was not even a Quest game anymore, really.
No.
Yeah,
wasn't that company I mean, this is probably boring to our listeners, but wasn't that company just a simple company run by a husband and a wife?
Well, it was Roberta Williams.
Yeah.
And her husband. I'm going to get this wrong, I think. I just remember, it was a very small company, and then they got bought out. I want to say Interplay, but I could be completely wrong. And so it was kind of that really big upheaval period post.
Right.
Where they and bought and sold. And, I mean, now you look at, back then, you're looking at the Commodore, you're looking at the Amiga, there's tons and tons and tons of software publishers and development houses.
Yeah.
And you look at today where there's maybe like 2 or 3 major developers, and that's it, like Take-Two, EA,
Right.
Ubisoft. That's it.
Yeah,
there's not that many big publishers anymore.
No,
so.
that's true. Which is obviously the same as everything else in the world, like with newspapers and every other kind of media, TV stations, radio stations. This consolidation effect.
And this is the interesting thing about mobile.
Yes,
is it's now back to the Wild West again.
It is,
which is nice. Where like a nerd like me in his basement can have a chance to basically write a software program that's going to get out there to the public.
Absolutely.
Again, so.
Like I look at it, like I like how you term that, the Wild Wild West, because I think about it the same way. It's like we're living in this revolutionary time, and things are like we have this opportunity to shape the way things are going to be. It's like the golden age of television before it became all owned by everybody. It's same kind of problem. Yeah. Like we're sitting here right now creating a television show, sort of. I mean. It needs some improvement, I admit, but
it's excellent. Don't sell yourself short.
No. I only say that because I'm a perfectionist and I know what I can do with this.
Yeah.
But I just haven't at the time. However, the fact that we can have this dialogue right here, and by tonight it'll be all around the world for anybody interested in listening
Well,
to
that's
it.
because you're talking about your dad. Like his radio show is syndicated. Like that's a big deal. And
Yeah.
back then, that's a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like now you think about like, oh, I do a podcast and people listen to it. Like it's not that impressive anymore.
No,
But what is impressive is that people can get together and create these things. now.
absolutely. Yeah, and to me, it's awesome. You know, it's like Rand and I keep saying, it's the stuff we always dreamed about. And I think we talked about this in
Absolutely,
our
yeah.
very first podcast, which never got released. Like, did you dream about this day and you're going, holy crap, I can't believe.
Well, I think I dreamed about, I know we're talking about technology. I dreamed about like, I never actually dreamed about, like if I saw an iPad when I was 12,
Right.
I would just, what? My mind would have been blown. It would have been nothing on earth would have been able to stop me from trying to get one because it's just ridiculous what you can do with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just amazing.
And it is amazing how, you know, it needs to be, as for human beings, it needs to be almost this incremental evolution of technology. Like it had to be incremental, or it would have been, like you said, our minds would have been blown. We probably would have thought it was mystical or paranormal or something.
Or like at the time, if it come out, it would have been, you know, $5,000.
Oh,
That was
no
kind of the
doubt.
first crack at tablets, I think, which I alluded to on a couple shows ago. Well, that was the first show, but was like tablets had come out earlier. It was
Right.
basically a laptop with the screen flipped around, but
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they were so expensive and because
Yeah.
it wasn't really presented in a way that people could immediately pick up and use, they were like, "Well, why would I spend? Why it's twice as
Yeah.
much as a laptop? Why would I even buy it?"
Yeah, there's no point.
And now Apple comes out with it half as much as a laptop, and people don't care that it doesn't have that much horsepower
Sure.
because it does the things you want to do with a tablet.
And it does the things that most people do, which is true.
You're
It's
exactly
the
correct,
majority
yes.
of people, all they do is surf the internet, go on Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
you know, look at some pictures or whatever. It does what the majority of people need, and plays great games too. Like actually, I just heard a report today, and I don't have the specs or the actual number, like how close this is, but somebody said that the iPad 2 is only a few degrees short of the horsepower of an Xbox 360.
Oh yeah, I believe that because look at how old an Xbox 360 is.
That's what I mean. Like it's that old, but we look at an Xbox 360 and play games on it and go, "Wow!" Right? And it's like now you have this in your hand with the same kind of power. It's pretty mind blowing.
It is pretty amazing, and is yeah. As far as I mean, the new iPad's dual core as well. So I think it's amazing too about the processing power that's in these consoles as well. It's just we just see these devices, but we don't really realize the full capabilities of them. Sometimes it's pretty amazing the stuff that's
That's
coming
right.
out.
And the truth is, everything's becoming a computer. Like when we talk tech now, we're not just talking about the geek stuff. Like really, everything we look at is pretty much a computer. Our televisions are computers. Our, you know, some of us have fridges. I don't personally, but some of us have fridges and stoves that are computers. And like you said, our cars, they're computers.
Yeah.
Or, you know, the guts of them and the
Well,
things that make
someone
them
was
tick.
telling me about they had this video this guy made where he had Velcro all around his house and in his car, and he would like take his iPad and Velcro it to his fridge, or
Right.
Velcro
Yeah,
it to
absolutely.
his cupboard and cook, and then he'd walk outside and he'd Velcro it to like the gas tank of his sport bike, and he'd
No,
use
that-
it as a GPS, and he'd take it and he'd Velcro it to somewhere in his office and use it as like as a teaching display or as a book or something. So
That sounds exactly like what this house would look like if I was single.
yeah. Well, a home. Home
And don't get me
automation is
wrong,
gonna
I
get
love
super
being
huge
married.
too,
And
so.
I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't even trade that because, you know, it's actually nice to escape from all of this technology from time to time.
Yeah, sometimes we need a break.
Yeah,
Sometimes.
that's pretty cool. So, so did you go to school, Anthony, for tech related things, or what was your journey there, education wise?
Meandering, I guess.
It sounds-
I'm not sure. I made a bit of a career of high school, so I happened to because I was very much not sure what I was going to do. I mean, when I was a teenager, I had no idea what I was going to do for a career. Like I thought, you know, maybe I was going to be a mechanic.
Right.
I had no idea. I knew that I didn't really particularly enjoy high school in terms of like a lot of things, but it's certainly like grade was difficult because I went from being kind of like a fairly gifted, being identified as a gifted student in public school to basically, you know, flunking my way through high school or just a D student because I wasn't sure what direction to go in.
Sure.
So I happened to bump into a really excellent teacher, and he was the one that taught computer science. And so I think that was kind of that big change there.
Yeah.
And then I had a love for technology going in. So I started taking computer programming. We had a fairly sophisticated curriculum for that, where I did touring, and then I was doing C, and on my own I was doing a bit of C++. Then I went to college, Niagara College. I went to Welland, Ontario. And it was kind of a disappointment at that time, because I was expecting, what I wanted to do was basically probably what Comp Sci University would be, where you're doing a lot more like interesting stuff, like understanding how interpreters work, building compilers,
Right.
really low level stuff, or high level stuff. I'm not sure which way.
High level for me.
Yeah. And so that was kind of like, so I was formally taught in programming, but I also taught myself computers, where I had like a little consulting company before I went away to college, because
Right.
I bought a computer when I was like 17. Before that, my uncle had a 486 and he drove trucks, so he'd be gone all week.
Right.
So I'd go to his place every night after school, and invariably I would wreck his computer
Right. And have to fix it.
and have to fix it by Friday night when he got back. And so
Nice.
that was good training.
Absolutely.
Probably not for him, probably not as exciting. Certainly, there was a couple tense weekends where things weren't working, but so that was the whole hardware side was basically self-taught. And then when I got out of college, it was
And I think that's probably pretty common in our generation. You know, I'm a little bit older than you, but because I have the same story. Really, everything I know was self-taught. It's really just applying yourself and digging in there and becoming good at technology. Mostly because, and I don't know if your story is the same, but mostly because I couldn't afford to hire people to do it for me. So I knew, and plus I also had the mind for it. Like it's like I knew I could, if I just stuck and stared at it long enough and worked through the problem long enough, I'd eventually come up with a solution. And
yeah, I mean, hiring someone to fix the technology side, don't think it's ever occurred to me once in my entire lifetime.
No.
I never even viewed that as really as a possibility.
No.
And there's been times where there's been times where probably that would have been the better decision. But yeah, just the way my brain is wired, I guess it just never really happened. So
yeah, and I'm the same way. In fact, I really enjoy that. I actually miss the days of tweaking. Like, I mean, I still am tweaking all kinds of things. More so with, it's more, I find actually these days it's more file management, backups, things like that, like tweaking things so things become automated.
Well, I think for you too, like building a studio is like, there's a lot of moving parts here. So I think that's really, those sort of projects are really interesting.
Yeah, it really gets me excited, like when everything's talking to each other and everything's synced and one computer's talking to that computer. And you know, that when that all works, I just sit there with the biggest feeling of satisfaction.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the joys of what I do for a living too, is I consult for companies, and I really like it when they come to me with weird problems. Like we need to talk to our moisture evaporators or something, some strange piece of hardware that you've got to get in there. It's logging data, pulling that data out, or like connecting pieces of hardware together and making them work. Like it's pretty interesting where now security is basically like a computer system, where phones are basically a computer system.
Absolutely.
So if you can tie all those things together, there's a lot of really cool projects that can be done.
I agree. Well, it sounds like both of us had a lot of fun. The other thing with this kind of work too, the days just blow by. Like it's like you never actually even. I mean, it feels like work. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's times you wish, and that has more to do with deadlines than it does to do with the actual work. But it's because we're always problem solving.
Yeah, it becomes it's one of those things, at least for me, like it's I don't notice as tiring, but at the end of the day or at the end of the week, I just sleep, because I don't really think of it as fatiguing during the day, but when you stop and get some breathing room, it's pretty fatiguing mentally.
Yeah, I'm starting to feel the effects of that for sure. And I'm actually 10 years older than you. All right, so anyway, those years, like, and just in the last few months, and I won't go into detail, but I'm starting to have some physical manifestations from sitting in this chair.
Yeah, I mean,
for that many years.
I remember This was when I first started working on my own because I was sitting in front of my desk then for like 18 hours a day. And if I tried to pick up anything with my hand, like a mouse, if I put my hand on top of a mouse, I'd feel like someone stabbed the back of my hand with an ice pick.
Yeah, exactly.
It's because basically my arm from my neck all the way down to my hand, that whole arm was all screwed up.
That's right.
Because you sit in one position for too long. You don't think about it.
No, you don't, because you're so focused, right?
Yeah.
And it's probably a bad thing, because you're so focused and time just goes by so fast. Like you actually lose track of it. And it's like you said, when you finally stop, you realize, it's then that you realize, all the pains in your body. And I don't know about you, like when you walk away from the screen, like all of a sudden, like it's almost like you're drunk.
Sometimes,
like it's just like,
or if you look up or away, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I do fear for my eyesight some days.
Yeah,
but it is funny how the things that drive us, sometimes we don't realize what the ramifications of that is.
Yeah, and anyway, I'm trying to make some changes in the way I do things. I mean, just even like a simple thing, like for me, going from using a mouse to using a tablet or a pen and tablet device has totally changed my the pain I used to get in my wrist. Like I don't get it anymore, but I think it's also triggering other like areas of my neck or something. So anyway, I guess we're all guinea pigs, folks. That's what it boils down to. We're all guinea pigs for this technology that's evolving and advancing so fast. But I'm willing to be a guinea pig. It makes.
I think the things that come out of it at the end of the day, like as I said, for both of us, like the paths we've taken enable us to do some pretty amazing things and to work with some pretty amazing people.
Oh yeah.
So you don't want to lose sight of the benefits.
No, I wouldn't trade it for anything. And, I know I'll be doing this kind of stuff till my dying day, which will be a long, long time from now.
Yeah. That's what I think is interesting too, is like we're creatives. We use technology, but like the idea of retirement in no way holds any fascination for me.
No, gosh, no. It's interesting. This will tie in nicely with the FauxCast that went out yesterday, because we discussed that in a different context. But it must be just the way, our minds work. And that's why we're maybe attracted to technology as young people. And we found our way here and our place here. And I think the encouraging thing is, I always say this to people, young people that are getting into technology, to me, the key to having there always will be work for you, I guess is what I want to say.
Yeah.
There always will be work for you, and just be good at it, and like Anthony said at the beginning of this podcast, don't try to be good at everything, focus in on the things you really, really enjoy, and the cream always rises to the top,
Yeah. And for people in tech, again, maybe not so much now as it used to be, but like working with other people. And starting, I think the earlier you get started on that, like working with others and figuring out what other people's skills are and putting those skills together, that's where I think a lot of real successes and a lot of amazing work comes out of. So
absolutely.
Don't be afraid to ask for help, and don't be afraid to talk to other people.
No, that's the thing about the tech community that I love. If I have a problem, I know I can call you. I know you can call me, and we can help each other out. And we get excited about that. It's not like, oh, I have all the secrets. I'm sure there's competitive elements, with companies in the corporate setting, but I think the companies that work around those, that do collaborate, even though they may be competitors, because everybody's different. Their businesses are therefore different. If their businesses are different, then they can basically serve different people in better ways. And I think just getting together this is why we have associations, really, or why we should have associations where, even if you sell insurance, you're talking to the other guy that sells insurance, you kind of realize you have the same problems, or you realize that both of you can serve different customers better, and then you can work together in some ways. So. Absolutely. So we're getting on to an hour, man. We I guess we did it without our fearless leader. Whether it was interesting or not is to be determined. But I've certainly enjoyed this dialogue and getting to know some of your history a bit more there, Anthony.
And you as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I should mention that you have a website. Is it AnthonyWilkinson.tv that
Yeah,
that
you
people
can go,
should go to
you can go
connect
there.
to?
I'm going to start putting some of the FauxCast stuff up there as well. But AnthonyWilkinson.tv, Aurora-bits.com is my corporate site. I think it's linked from the blog. So
Nice. And we should also mention that you do another podcast, Good Morning Godrich, is something you've been working on for quite some time as well.
yeah, I started that last May, I think. And so it's one of those things that I've kind of put on hiatus for the winter. But I'm hoping to start up again with the spring and find some local community people. And, I think that's going to be one of those, again, working with other people that maybe with some more stuff that we'll be collaborating on in the future
Absolutely.
as well.
And so to end this podcast, is there any of the episodes we could trail out on that you're extremely proud of?
Oh, I think they're all good. I think they're all
I do too.
I think the What's
That's
Your
not what I'm
Story
saying.
one, we can do that because if we're talking about like kind of our backgrounds, then I think that's kind of an interesting one as well.
Where would I?
And
What
I
episode
think
is
that's
that?
maybe one of the first 10 or something. Sorry, I can't see the screen over there.
Good
But
Morning God. It's June 4th. Days of vlogging.
up from there, I think.
House of Guitars. Good morning.
Yeah. I mean, it's really great. Again, of finding those people in our community who do different things.
Yeah.
So even if a creative with a computer and a creative with a guitar or a creative with fine art, there's a lot of cool projects you can work on together. So
Well, I have to say it was these Good Morning Godrich things that made me aware of you, and then through some other friends, told me about you. So I'm really glad.
I'm gonna leap out of
hooked up.
frame here.
I don't even know where to. I'm seeing one of if you were a prostitute named Martha. That looks pretty interesting.
What is it? Oh yeah, that's a good one at the jail.
All right, so let's pause this.
Back in frame.
Back in frame. So, ladies and
Back.
gentlemen, we thank you for listening one more time. This is FauxTech EP02, and we're going to go out with those of you that are. Whoops, let me just get that framed in there a little nicer. We're going to go out with one of Anthony Wilkinson's podcasts, Good Morning Godrich. Check him
At
out.
the jail even. Wow.
Check him out at anthonywilkinson.tv. Thanks for listening.
Take care. Safe trip, Brian.
And okay, and please play. I had this problem before.
Good morning, Godrich. This is Anthony Wilkinson. It is June the 18th, 2010, and I'm in one of the courtyards of the Huron County Historic Gaol, or of course we call it the jail. And the jail was built, and it's on my notes. Construction started in 1839, or I should say construction started actually in 1840. The land was cleared in 1839. In 1862, the walls were extended, and the governor's house was built on the side of the gaol in 1901. This gaol follows the Panopticon style, which means there's basically, if you can look behind me, there's a central kind of a tower structure with.
I love that Max Headroom thing you have going on.
The yards coming off. I'm in one of the yards right now. The walls are 18 feet
That's
high.
my bandwidth.
And they extend 5
That's me
feet
holding
underground.
the,
What I found interesting was that there was, at one point,
a really
you see
crappy
behind me, there's
webcam on
3
a
feet of
laptop.
loose stone on top of the wall.
You know what? But here's the thing.
basically,
You're
if you match
doing
the
it.
scale of the
You're doing
wall,
it, right?
you're
It's
trying to
like
get over this
Yeah,
loose
don't wait to
stone
get
and
good
pull it on
gear,
top
just
of
start.
yourself and
That's
then
right.
have a
Yeah,
really
just do
awesome
it.
time falling 18 feet with stones falling on you.
In fact,
So,
Anthony, I have
built
to.
basically
I'll just fade it
as
back.
a-
If you
as
can go to
a deterrent
anthonywilkinson.tv, you can
measure.
check out
Other
all of his
interesting
podcasts.
facts were
But
that
I want to
the,
thank Anthony for
a hole
inspiring,
was
because
added
he said that very
and
thing when
that's
I
what
first met with him. He
basically
said, you just got to do it.
enabled
You just got to
a
do it.
separate district from
And
London. So
that was
one of
inspirational
the-
and a catalyst for us sitting here today. So
one of
thanks,
the-
man.
Thank you very much.
big birth-
So anyway, we're signing off,
Huron kind of
FauxTech
separate
episode
identity
2.
At the time.
Peace.
The
Peace
last
out.
public hanging in Canada was held here, which was Nicholas Milady, which there's a story about.